Assalamu alaikum, dear guests and viewers, and welcome to Ramadan Reflections, brought to you by Cezire Association, Cyprus Islamic Association, and Cypriot Muslims working in cooperation for the community and working in partnership, of course, with the community. And our topic today is going to be culture and Islam. So Turkish Cypriot culture and Islam. And so we won't waste any time. I'll introduce my respected guests. I have Mustafa Qureshi, founder of Cezire Association, and also he's an honorable and well-respected researcher on Turkish Cypriot culture and also on Islam and other faiths on the island. I have Yusuf Ahmed, who is the co-founder of Cyprus Islamic Association. Thanks for coming on. I have, of course, my respected guest, Ertan Karpaz, the well-known Turkish Cypriot journalist and also co-founder of Cezire Dernegi. And our two teachers from South London, actually. So one of our teachers is Alimullah from South London, and we also have Ahmed Barut from South London, who is also co-founder of Cypriot Muslims. Thank you guys for joining me this evening. So first question will go to my friend Mustafa Qureshi. And the question is this. But before we start the question, I watched my grandparents and elders as a child occasionally pick up a copy of the Quran, which was to me quite a strange book. It had, when I opened it and looked inside, funny letters that I couldn't read, and it really it looked quite enchanting. And they would pick it up, my grandfather would kiss it and then put it on his forehead, read a few lines, put it away. My grandmother couldn't read it, but she still kissed it and put it on her forehead, and they were hanging up high. That was my first cultural thing I saw of Turkish Cypriots and Islam. My question to you, Mustafa Qureshi, does any part of the Turkish Cypriot culture find its roots in Islam?
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings to all our viewers. Thanks for tuning in. I just want to start off with, we're all living in the UK, and many of us must know people who have converted to Islam. There's no official statistics, but we know for sure that there's hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who have become Muslim, English Muslims, Caribbean Muslims. I even met a Greek Cypriot Muslim in Lewisham Mosque. And for them, it's quite a difficult decision, especially for a Greek Cypriot or someone from an Orthodox background, where the cultural baggage that they have often means that they have to leave their culture behind or face a lot of problems from their home. But as Turkish Cypriots, naturally, we all recognize that we're from a Muslim heritage. And the late president of North Cyprus, late Rauf Denktaş, he said that in 1985 that Kıbrıs'ta İslam kültürü var, which means in Cyprus there is an Islamic culture. So basically the Turkish Cypriots, by that means, belong to the Islamic civilization, regardless of whether they follow Islam or not. And the Islamic religion and the culture that developed out of that to form the Turkish Cypriot culture is very much deep-rooted in our day-to-day life, even to this day. You have the Sunnet, for example, the circumcision, which has proven to have many health benefits as well. And the Turkish Cypriots will often have a big party out of that as well. And that's a big part of Islam. That's a big part of Islam. Our names, I mean, the most common names that we have, Mehmet, Ahmet, Mustafa, they're all names of the Prophet, upon be peace. Fatma is a daughter of the Prophet. Hassan, Hussein, the grandchildren of the Prophet. Ibrahim is a Prophet's name as well. And even with these new names that we have, these quote-unquote Yeni isimler, which actually go back to before the Islamic period. But anyway, even these new names, you know, everyone's got at least a mum or dad who's got one of these Islamic names, or grandparent. So it's very much ingrained in us and our ancestry as well. For our children, we have an Altı aylık kına. So when our child is 6 months, we get the henna, the kına, and we put it on the child, and we recite Surah Yasin as well. And although this isn't something that's actually prescribed in Islam per se, it's a merge of the Turkish culture and Islam, and it goes hand in hand. And that's where we get the altı aylık kınası from as well. Other things as well, some of the obvious ones, inshallah, mashallah, these are very commonly used as well. But also things that we use in Cyprus, like selam kardeş, selam. We're taught to say selam, peace be upon you, as Muslims, and kardeş, that's like the most common thing we call each other. In the Quran, in the chapter Hujurat, we told innamal mu'minina ikhwa, the believers are brothers, and that's why in many of the Muslim communities they'll always call each other brother in whichever language that they use. Other things as well, our folk costumes as well. The men wear the dizlik, and if you notice, it's going over the knee, and traditionally in Islamic teachings, and according to most the most common schools of thought, covering from your navel to below your knee is covering your private parts, your aura, and that's why we have that kind of loose garment that we have there. And it's loose as well because Islamically we're taught not to wear tight clothing that will show the shape, our bodily shape, and that's for men and women. That's for men and women. Often let's talk about hijab for women, and that's something that's important for men as well, to dress modestly. Our women obviously are wearing clothing that we may see other people's communities wearing, but our folk costumes are a constant reminder that our roots are from a highly religious community as well. We have Hussein Hoja, who many of us know here, who recites Mevlits for us. And again, a Mevlit is, maybe not all the Muslims will have Mevlits, but again, we can maybe say it's a perfect merger of the Turkish culture with Islamic principles as well. So they'll recite verses from the Quran, beautiful hymns, which we call ilahi, and it includes the life of the Prophet as well. And it's really moving as well. We have our cenazet törenleri, our funeral processions. Again, using kind of religious customs and verses from the Quran as well. Other things as well, our food. It surprises me actually. A lot of our food we share with our Muslim brothers in surrounding countries, not only just Turkey, but from the Levant as well, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. Molahia, Molahia is actually the national dish of Egypt. And as much as we share similarities with our Greek Cypriot brothers in Cyprus, Molahia was typically known as a Muslim food, and they wouldn't have Molahia. I remember I had a close friend, a Greek Cypriot friend, and he took me to one of their restaurants, and they brought all these food along, and it was all the similar foods that we would have as well. So we had fırın makarnası. So I was about to eat the food. They were like, "No, it's got pork in it." Okay, no worries. I'll pass this one. Then they had the şeftali kebabı, which is called şeftalya. Great. About to dig in. No, you can't have that either. That's pork in there as well. Yeah, what do we share? But thankfully, they eat a lot more fish than we do. So I was able to have that as well. So our food is slightly different as well. It's similar to the Greek Cypriots, but it's got a Muslim twist to it. So there's no pork in it, and there's more of a meat element there as well. Now that's kind of a basic roundup of Turkish Cypriot culture, which has developed alongside Islam, and it will be impossible to take out the Turkish Cypriot culture from Islam completely. But it gives us an advantage if you want to know about your religion, and as I mentioned, the hundreds of thousands of people that are becoming Muslim are having difficulties. We don't have that issue. In fact, my Greek Cypriot friend would often talk about religion and Christianity and Islam, and he came this close to becoming Muslim. I actually convinced him, and then he had a look and he was convinced, and then after a minute or so he had this kind of distressed look, and he realized that if he was to become Muslim he would have to disown all his culture, and unfortunately that pressure from the community held him back from becoming Muslim. He wasn't strong enough to pass that test, but we as Turkish Cypriots, we don't have that issue, and in fact the word Turk was synonymous with the word Muslim. And I believe if we keep to our roots, it will make us closer to our Turkish Cypriot heritage, but at the same time, we'll be better British citizens as well, abiding the law and integrating with society while still keeping a strong link with our roots as well. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to my respected brothers on here as well. Thank you.
We are having a lot of comments as well, and which I'm taking notes of. And if any of you can see any comments that I can't see, please bring them forward. That was really interesting, Mustafa, and I could relate to a lot of what you were saying. I did ask a Greek Cypriot friend once about the matter of having pork in their dishes, and the grandmother told me that it was a cheaper option. So they probably used beef and lamb as well in the days, but because it was a cheaper option to use, that's why they used pork. And it's also very interesting, and an interesting thing that our viewers know that most Greek Cypriots, especially who use the old calendar, which was the original form of Greek Orthodoxy, did not actually eat pork. They refrained from eating pork probably before the 1920s, 1921. Just to bring that to our audience attention, not all Greeks ate pork. My second question is to Ertan Karapazlı. But before I start, my first visit as a child was to a mosque. I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. It was in East London. I went there. I remember it was a very small building made of prefabricated material. And I remember the men had to go and pray in first, and then they allowed the women to go in. And because I was accompanied by my mother and auntie, I had to wait outside because the women were inside praying. And I was intrigued to see what they were doing. Looked through the window. There was this group of women, heads covered, and they're on the floor, bowing up and down. We started laughing in the courtyard. But it was my first experience. But it left a mark on me, and there was an interest after that time. Ertan Karapazlı, can you recall any of your experiences getting familiar with Islam as a child, as an adult, as a teenager? Could you share your experiences with us today? Thank you.
I think my experiences as a Turkish Cypriot born and raised in London is pretty typical to most Turkish Cypriots of my generation. We used to go to the mosque for Bayram, for Eid, for Cenaze whenever somebody in the family passed away. That was like the normal thing to do. But I didn't really think much of it when I was young. I just thought, okay, Christians are going to the church, Muslims are going to the mosque, and that's it really. In fact, my parents, they weren't really practicing in Islam. They didn't know much about Islam, and they didn't really go out of their way to teach me much. I think it was maybe when my father realized that one day I'd come home from school and I must have said something like Jesus is the Son of God, because this is what we were learning in school, and I wasn't learning at anything at home that contradicted that. So that's when he went out of his way to tell me, no, actually, we don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. We believe he's just a prophet. But at this stage, I hadn't even heard of the Prophet Muhammad. You know, my dad's teaching was very reactionary. Yeah, I would go to the mosque on Bayram, and I used to enjoy the feeling of going there. I used to see the vast open space in the mosque, and you know, I used to, as a little kid, I'd like to run around and stuff like that. And you know, even when we were joining in the prayers, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where to sit, where to stand, how to cross my legs. I didn't know any of that. I was just going along with it. But there was one zikr that we do after Bayram namazı, after the Eid prayer, that I really liked. I really found it very melodious, you know. It goes, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, walillahil hamd. We used to repeat this, and I didn't know the words, but I used to just love listening to it, and the melody of it. It used to make me feel very spiritual and peaceful. And I remember when I went to a mosque after my grandfather passed away. After the prayer, we were leaving the mosque, and there was a man, a Turkish man, who was standing there with big beard, Ottoman style clothes, big turban on his head. Looking back in hindsight, I think he was probably a member of the Naqshbandi Sheikh Nazim Jamaat. And my dad told him that he brought me to the mosque because my grandfather had passed away. So this guy, he just started talking to me for about 45 minutes. I don't know what he was talking about because my Turkish wasn't very good back then. He was probably talking to me about life after death. But 45 minutes out of politeness, I was just pretending to listen, nodding my head, thinking, when is this guy going to stop talking so I can go home? But what was interesting was that even though he was dressed very differently to the regular person, I didn't think much of it. I didn't think about, his turban or his beard or anything like that. I just thought, okay, this is just some guy, just a regular guy. And I think as I was getting older, that's when I started to kind of question more my identity and where I belong. Being a Muslim, I'd say I was a Muslim, but I knew nothing of Islam. I used to see that the Pakistanis in my school, they would not come into school on Eid days, whereas I was going to school just like the other Turkish Cypriots. So I noticed with the Turkish Cypriots particularly, there was something missing. So I started reading the Quran and starting to try to understand my religion. When I was about 15, 16, I tried fasting a couple of days in Ramadan. And then I remember my mum saying to me, actually, like, she was very worried about me because I was the only person in my family who'd ever fasted. And she said something like, are you okay? Are you sure this is the path you want to go down? And I said, don't worry, it's not like I'm going to start praying 5 times a day like a Pakistani. Because in my mind, I thought Islam, like practicing Islam, was just for the Pakistanis. Like, us Turks, Turkish Cypriots, we don't do that. That's not our culture. I had this misconception. But then as I got older and started reading the Quran more and started reflecting more on my religion, I realized that just because we're Turkish and just because in my circle, I didn't know any practicing Turkish Cypriots, it doesn't make us any different to any other Muslim. We don't have any special permissions on the gates of paradise saying that, oh, Turkish Cypriots can get in just like that. Like praying 5 times a day and things like this and not drinking alcohol, it's the same rules that apply to other Muslims are the same rules that apply to us. And we're not special just because of our background or anything like that. It's our deeds and our belief that make us special in the eyes of God. So I started practicing, and at first I did experience some kind of cultural conflict between myself and my family members. And that was mainly because, I'll tell you the reason why. They were under the impression that by becoming a practicing Muslim, I was becoming a Pakistani or an Arab. And to a certain extent, they had a point because there was no Turkish Cypriot religious platform at the time. I had no Turkish Cypriot religious friends. And, in order to, when you start becoming religious, you seek out religious friends because you want friends who will encourage you on that path. And the only friends I found at the time were Pakistanis and Arabs. So I started picking up their mannerisms and their way of dressing and things like that. And this was creating a cultural conflict between me and my family. But then after a while, I realized that, hold on, there's only so much I can, their culture, the Arab and Pakistani culture is very beautiful. There are many good things we can incorporate. But it only goes so far because as a Turkish Cypriot, there's certain things that I won't be able to relate to regarding Arabs and Pakistanis. So I started looking for a more homegrown approach to Islam, a more homegrown understanding of Islam. And I started seeking out Turkish Cypriot religious friends, and they were very hard to find at the beginning. But after trying so hard and going out of my way to meet people, we eventually started developing a circle, and now we have a platform such as this where we hope that Turkish Cypriots who want to learn about Islam and Turkish Cypriots who are practicing their religion, they can feel comfortable to do so in a Turkish Cypriot context. And I believe for myself, Islam helped me become more Turkish Cypriot than I was before. And hopefully a platform like this can also do the same for others who are in the same position that I was.
That was well, that was actually very interesting because there's a lot of people. I mean, I can see a few people making comments. And dear viewers, I am taking notes of the questions. We've got a few questions from Shannon Ali. We've got a question from Amber, and we've got a few people who are saying they're enjoying the live show, waving their hands. Assalamu alaikum from Nülüfer Hüseyin. Gülfidan Abla says, Allah nazardan korusun. Allah sağlıklı mutlu, huzurlu günler dilerim. Sevgili, saygılar kardeşlerim, which is very nice that we've got people from the older generation watching as well. So maybe in the future we need to do some short Turkish language programs as well. Thank you, Ertan, for sharing that. My next question will go to a teacher. They've got two teachers here, so we Ali Mullah. But I want to give an example before I ask the question. Turks actually, there's a Turkish proverb and a saying in Anatolia and also in Cyprus that being a teacher is a sacred career. It's like a sacred career because you're teaching someone, and I'm sure that stems back because of the whole idea of Islam is on the basis of Iqra, recite or teach the faith. That's why a teacher was always held, especially in the villages and in the towns, like high esteem. My question to you, Ali Mullah, what has Islam given you and how has it helped you in your career as a teacher?
That's an interesting question. I think, like you said, the first word in the Quran is Iqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaqa, meaning read in the name of your Lord who has created you. So yeah, I think we do hold a teacher in higher esteem in our culture. I'm not so sure it's held as highly in the UK sometimes, but it's something that, growing up, we were sent to school, sort of with the utmost respect for our teachers, and sort of taking on a job as a teacher is something that I've been very happy to do for that reason, because I had a very good relationship with my teachers. I had a lot of respect for my teachers, and they were very sort of good and positive role models to me. So I like the idea of doing the same thing. When it comes to sort of teaching in Islam, one of the laqab, or one of the nicknames of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, we refer to him as al-muallim, the teacher. And Islam emphasizes on sort of reading, education, bettering oneself. So Islam really does go hand in hand with teaching and education. I think another point could be that teaching and Islam hand in hand, they share a lot of qualities, and I think one that's made me not just better as a person, better at my job, and a better Muslim as well, together is the quality of patience. So you sort of learn to have sabr and patience with younger students, or sometimes you don't always get along with someone. But that's something in every aspect of our lives that has sort of developed as a result. So being a teacher and a Muslim, I've been able to develop that very strongly. And, it comes up time and time in the Quran. Phrases like "Inna Allaha ma'aka sabirin," so Allah is indeed with the patient. So there's so much that we can take from that. And yeah, that's my take on it, really. Yeah.
Can I ask you something on that topic? I remember as a child watching the film The Message, and it was during the scene where the first mosque is being established in Medina, and although you don't see the Prophet himself, but you can see that he's lifting boxes, and you've got that famous Anthony Quinn who plays Hamza, his uncle, saying with that beautiful, very Greek Cypriot kind of accent, saying to him, but why, oh Prophet of God, why are you working so hard? And then there's a beautiful scene of the people teaching these kids, the teachers, and I remember that I remember it because it kept a mark on me, where there was this kind of proverb in the film that whoever teaches someone will get a reward in paradise for being a teacher. And teaching someone is really, really important, because that's why I suppose Turks say, or Muslims say, it's a sacred career, because you're actually teaching someone value in life. You're teaching someone to read and write, and you have to remember that lots of people could not read and write in the days. And so, is there any hadith about teaching?
Do you
that you
know,
can that comes to mind?
I think you mentioned it, off the top of my head, I can't paraphrase the whole thing. But you mentioned, sort of teaching someone there are so many benefits in it, and there's so much reward in teaching someone to read. But actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ first came to Medina, before doing anything, the first thing he established was the mosque. And the mosque for us is a center of learning. It's not just a place of worship. It's a community center. Interestingly enough as well, and I don't know how true this still is, but I know that in Cyprus, the amount of schools and mosques was incomparable. So the amount of primary schools and mosques were exactly the same number for a very, very long time. So the emphasis on sort of worship and Islam and the emphasis on school would have been exactly the same. And from my understand, a lot of our primary school teachers were Hodjas as well.
Yes.
So yeah.
So to answer, just to add on to what Alimullah has said, there was a time in Cyprus where the number of schools were the same number as mosques. Is that correct? What you said, Alimullah? Or yeah. And the reason for that, brothers and sisters, is that during the early part of the Ottoman Empire, and also the later part of the Ottoman Empire, and into the first years of the British colonial system, is that the mosque was always attached to the school. The school was, attached to the mosque. It was called a mekteb, and the mekteb was usually attached to a school, to a mosque. So the mosque and school sometimes they were the same building, sometimes there was a wall apart from them, and it was usually the case so the government or governing bodies don't have to pay two separate salaries. They would usually in the villages have a teacher who was the imam as well. So he would his work would be to run the mosque 5 times a day and also to teach. And another point that we always forget when we talk about culture in Islam is that in Cyprus it was common, especially our parents' generation, up until 1967, probably 1968, that children who went to school, to public schools, to state schools, would have their din dersi, which is their religious education, on a Friday, and the elder children, so altıncı sınıftan yukarı, so those from 14 years above, were taken every Friday to the mosque to conduct Friday prayers. And before I go to my next question, Nilufer says, love the message. She's talking about the film, definitely a great film to watch. And we have our brother Muhammad Al Hadrusi. Hello, brothers. And they always call it kitab, I think he's trying to say. And we're being watched in Saudi Arabia at the same time. So thank you, Muhammad Al Hadrusi, for watching from near Kobar in Saudi Arabia. My next question goes to another teacher, Ahmed Parut. Before I ask you this question, as a child, and I'm talking about myself, every night before I had to go to bed, my parents, or my mother especially, would teach me 2 surahs I had to recite. One was Surah Fatiha in Arabic, and one was the Ikhlas Surah. Probably that's the only 2 that she knew off by heart. And the other thing that she would teach me was a small prayer in Turkish that we'll do a Turkish program. But I remember it used to start with Yattım sağıma, döndüm soluma, melekler şahit olsun dinime imanıma. And I forgot the rest of the words, guys. Yeah, but this was my first introduction, and that's how I was taught my religion. So my question to you, Ahmet Barut, being a teacher as well, how would you teach young children or young members from the Turkish Cypriot community about Islam?
Well, just to start off with my own experiences as a child growing up, as a Turkish Cypriot, I never actually had like formal education in Islam, and I never really learnt about it as I was growing up. The only place I would learn about it was at school, and I'd never been to a mosque either until like 7 or 8 years old, and so the only sort of like information I had about Islam was from my parents, like very like basic stuff, like we believe in Allah, we believe that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is our prophet. Also, like phrases like inshallah, mashallah, that sort of thing. My mum actually taught me how to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Whenever we were on the plane on the way to Cyprus, she said to recite it. So for Allah's protection. Yeah. And yeah, so as I got growing up, I didn't really have a lot of information about Islam, and I wasn't actually curious either, to be honest. I did believe in Allah, I did think about Allah, but I didn't really think about Islam. But in terms of educating your child about Islam, I think it's very important to make sure you try to cultivate the love for Allah within your children. And to do that, obviously, you have to do it yourself as well. So you have to learn yourself about Allah. And we will do that by, looking into Islam, what Islam teaches us about Allah, how who Allah is, how merciful He is, how loving He is, how passionate, and also talk about. So you can talk about these things to your child, and also talk about the blessings that Allah has given us. And there's many blessings in the world. Like for example, this world itself is so amazing. But another blessing, which is one of the greatest blessings that He has given us, is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So teaching your children about the Prophet himself, about who he was, the fact that in Islam, as Muslims, we know him to be Habibullah, which means the beloved of Allah. So if we love the beloved of Allah, can you imagine the love for that Allah has for us? So that's very important. I think love for Allah and the Prophet is very important. So you can also talk about the Prophet's character, how kind and merciful he was, because Allah has sent him as a mercy to mankind to us, and he's the best of examples for us as well. So and even the fact that not only the fact that the Prophet brought Islam to us, he's done many things for us, and if you know the things that he did for us, you will love him as well. So this is very important to convey to your children. And then also even talking about the legacy of Islam in the world with your children, about how much advancements they brought to the world, and going back to like our Turkish Cypriot culture, talking about the different things in our culture, like the words, even like inshallah, mashallah, salamlar. What do these words mean? I mean, if you get a background information about these words, you understand it more, and you'll be more confident in your belief. And other things like Bayrams as well. I mean, why do we celebrate Bayram? Is it just to get money as a child from your grandparents or something like that? What's it for? What's the background story of it? So it's really important to know the story of the Bayrams, why we practice it, why we believe in it. So just basically, just some personal advice for myself. Just make sure you try your best to learn about Islam, who Allah is, who the Prophet is, salatu wasalam, and just talk to your children about them. And then that will naturally increase their love for them. And then once that love has set in your children, then they will naturally want to be more inclined to Islam, to learn more about Islam as well. So that's just a few pieces of information, some advice for myself about trying to educate your children.
Thank you, Ahmed. That's really interesting to hear as well. And lots of people asking questions and we will come, dear viewers, after our next speaker, we will take questions and answers. And one of them is also another question about zakat. Apparently, you have to give 2.5% of your assets and savings. So if you have a house with a mortgage on and you have profit in the equity, but you can't get it out of your property, do you still? Thank you, Shannon Ali. I've took a note of that, and we will try to answer that question. And you have another question as well. And Shannon Ali, she's great. She's been following my seerah of the Prophet Muhammad, which is shown on the UK Turkish Cypriot community page. And somebody did question me, did send me a message yesterday saying maybe you can do like a children's version of the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad. I'd love to do that. I'll probably do that better than doing the adult version, but I'd love to do that. And hopefully we can do that here as well. Yes, my next question goes to our young Yusuf Ahmed. And before I ask the question, one Turkish Cypriot had told me when he found Islam, he felt like he dived into a massive ocean and he was like drowning in. He wanted to learn everything so quickly. And years later, he told me that I should have learnt to walk and maybe paddle before I could swim. So I'm asking you this question, Yusuf. Can you give us some of your personal experiences as a young man finding Islam? Was it like an ocean? Did you feel like you fell into an ocean?
Very good question. It's been fantastic listening to some of the comments from everyone else on here as well, by the way. There's no doubt that Islam is ingrained within our Turkish Cypriot heritage, within our culture. And I can also resonate with a lot of the things that have said. Some things, not other things. I think everyone has different upbringings as well. I was brought up by a single mother, but what was really important was akhlaq, was our conduct, the way that we would carry ourselves, our behavior. When I was younger, I know nowadays you go to someone's house or you go to a party, whatever, there's kids running around, you know, they're shouting, they're screaming and all the rest of it. If I ever did anything like that, mum wouldn't allow it. You know, she'd just give me a look and that's the end of it. But that in and of itself is something which probably finds itself as a root within the Islamic tradition as well, in the sense that, you know, we know that Muhammad, upon whom be peace, taught that he came only to perfect moral conduct, to perfect good manners. And good manners is in my opinion, a core part of our culture. You know, we were brought up to be respectful to our elders, respectful to other people, and we never look down on people either. This is how I've been brought up. Now, obviously, when we talk about Cypriot culture, it's quite a complex thing, because depends, you know, are you growing up in the UK, you're growing up in Cyprus, you're growing up in other parts of the world, Australia, perhaps America. I can only talk about my personal upbringing. I was brought up in a way where, you know, I didn't eat pork, and we were taught to be grateful, to be appreciative. And there were times that were tough, but, you know, we never, there wasn't ever a time where we complained, because we would always be grateful for what we have. I know that there are other parts of our community that are the complete opposite.
Yusuf, can I just stop you for 1 second? So,
yeah.
Dear viewers, it's nearly 8 p.m. and this is when the country comes to remember all its key workers, the NHS staff, our doctors, and those really who go out. So people open the door, they clap, some people are doing fireworks, but we're here to remember. Just a minute, we'll use a minute to remember those key workers. And there's also the key workers who are not remembered or not recognized. There's a lot of people putting their lives out, people that work for, not only for the NHS, people that work for pharmacies, people that have to go to the pharmacies every day and go and pick up and drop medication. They're not NHS staff, but they are working for a pharmacist. Our Turkish Cypriots, and also all the other funeral directors, lots of funeral directors who, the hodjas, the priests, the rabbis, those who have been involved in burying many or even cremating in the Hindu religion. So we remember all those people who actually put themselves at risk to save our lives, and we're grateful for them. And what COVID has done for the time being, brothers and sisters, it's brought communities together. It showed people that, you know, something like this can not discriminate, and it took lives from different communities. It took Muslim lives, it took Christian lives, it took Jewish lives, It took Hindus, Sikhs, it took anybody, and it can affect anyone. And that's why we need to put our differences away. When you look at COVID-19, you see the heart of the religious establishments across the world closed. No Easter parade. There was no mass to be held at Easter. There is no Taraweeh in Ramadan in Masjid al-Nabawi, in Masjid al-Aqsa, in the Haram of the. There's no tawaf at the Haram, at the Bayt of Mecca. So it brings us to reality that, you know, sometimes we might be different. We might have different faiths, might have different ideologies, but when something like this comes upon us, we're affected all the same. And it brings us to reality that we're all the same, because why? We're all being created by the same force, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, Yusuf, you continue for please.
That was lovely.
Yeah.
Trying to collect my thoughts. So I think I was talking about being appreciative, which is very relevant to what you were just saying, actually, appreciating those in our communities that are helping us get through these difficult times. And to be appreciative, to show appreciation, to be thankful, to be grateful, is a core part of our faith. In fact, the first word of the Quran, arguably by some scholars, is Alhamdulillah. You know, Allah has shukr. You know, all thanks, appreciation, praises due to God. This is the first word. Some scholars have gone so far to say Alhamdulillah is the Quran, the rest of it is a tafsir. This is the importance of being grateful, of being thankful. And I see this a lot in our older generation. You know, they're happy with a little bit of churek and a little bit of zaytin, and they can live their lives like that. But maybe perhaps some of our younger generations, you know, we forget some of the hardships that our grandparents or our parents went through when they came over to this country to give us the opportunities that we never had. All of these things for me stem from our faith. And although we might no longer practice certain elements of our faith, you can still see traces of our faith throughout our culture. I genuinely believe that Turkish Cypriot people are good people. They're people who try to be good, they try to be upright, they try to help people. And that's what we're known for. And we're known for that because this is a core part of our faith, and this is something that we've inherited and we've continued from our previous generations. This is something that we haven't lost, and we should continue and we should maintain. There are other elements that we have lost. And perhaps those elements we do need to revive, because we also, as a community, need to look at ourselves introspectively, retrospectively as well, and say to ourselves, we're not perfect. There's certain things that we do in our community which, you know, we're known for, that we might want to change, that we might want to better ourselves. And that's fine. Because when we talk about our culture, what is culture? Culture isn't something that's static or restricted to a certain time or place. It's something that evolves. We determine what our culture will be. That's down to our culture is nothing more than the ideas, customs, social behavior of us as a society. And as our society evolves, as we move forward, as we progress, then obviously our culture will evolve with that. So the one thing I will say is that when it comes to Islam, Islam is a religion or a faith which is inherently modern. It transcends culture. It's not Arabic, it's not Pakistani, it's not even Turkish. You can be English and be Muslim. You could be Russian and be Muslim. You could be Polish and be Muslim. You could be Australian and be Muslim. Because in Islam, it's not about ethnicity. It's not about race. It's not about color. It's not about culture. And we should embrace that. Unfortunately, because a lot of the Muslims that are here in the UK emigrated here, they brought with them their culture. And sometimes we're unable to distinguish the faith from the culture. But the faith in and of itself is something which is beautiful. And it isn't something, like we've heard tonight, it isn't necessarily something which is Pakistani or Arabian. You don't have to eat biryani or curry or Arabic food to be Muslim. This is ridiculous. Being Muslim is beyond all of that. It's beyond time. And it's even relevant for future cultures, for future customs. Because the one thing that happened during the 7th century was a backward century. There's no doubt about it. But Islam came and changed that. There was there was misogyny, there was hatred towards women. Women were bought and sold and treated like property. And Islam came and gave women rights and said, no, women were able to vote in 7th century Arabia. You know, it took to the 1920s here in the UK for women to go out and protest to be able to have the right to vote. We had a welfare system in the 7th century because Islam was modern. Islam was ahead of its time in the 7th century. And Islam is modern inherently, and it is modern today. It's not something that's backward. And although we look back in our past and we see Islam there, Islam can also be in our future. It has the answers for some of the dilemmas that we are going to face when it comes to AI, when it comes to big data, when it comes to, you know, self-driving cars and the ethics around that. What do we look to? We could look to Islam. Islam has those kind of answers and can provide us with a solid grounding with respect to those things. I was very blessed and very fortunate to go to a university where that's where when I really became more of a practicing Muslim. I was heading up the Islamic society there, and we had about 1,000 people as part of that society, and it was a very multicultural society. We had people from Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, all over the world, English people that had become Muslim. And it was so beautiful to be standing at the front on a Friday, delivering the sermon, delivering the khutbah, and to see all of these people, different colors, different ideologies, different backgrounds, different cultures, yet shoulder to shoulder, treating each other as family, as brothers and sisters. That's what our faith is about. So for me, what were the observations I saw growing up, you know, in terms of Islam and culture? That Islam is compatible with many cultures. It transcends culture. That one should be themselves. One shouldn't have to leave or negate their culture in order to be Muslim. That's not what Islam is. And if that's what people think, then you know, we need to go back and understand Islam for what it really is.
That's very beautifully put, because there's a few points that you hit on which I'd like to actually maybe in the future have a whole program on. One is like race and creed in Islam. And thank you, April Mehmet. She's saying about time we had a decent program on Facebook. Thank you. That's really talk show, she said. And she's got a question that I want to ask you guys as well. But I mean, that's one thing, because when we look at the culture of Turkish Cypriots within Islam, one thing that I was going to make a point out, and I wish I was actually not the host today, maybe next time, is that it actually broke barriers. So Cyprus was an island that did not suffer from racism and fascism before colonial intervention on the island, where you saw mixed marriages. When I say mixed marriages, not between Christian and Muslims, although they happened as well, but you saw Turkish Cypriot women, white, fair skin, blue-eyed women, marrying a Somalian or Sudanese guy of origin who worked in Limassol, for example, or a Pakistani soldier that came with the British Empire would marry a Turkish Cypriot. We've got loads of documents to actually show this happened, and we've got people who are like half this and half that. And this is the thing, it actually knocked down barriers, not put up barriers. So that's a good point. The second thing, another point you made, which is always something the Turkish Cypriots say. So when Turkish Cypriots are going through some sort of tribulation here, you always hear the older generation say, I wish I never come to the UK. I wish we stayed in our villages. And what did we eat? That we ate olives and bread and water. Ama buraya gelmeseydi. And so, you know, it just shows how humble our people are deep down, that, you know, I'd rather suffer but be in my own homeland to suffer, knowing the land and the atmosphere and the people around me. I'd rather eat olives and bread than lose what I've lost in the UK. And a lot of people use this. So a few of the questions. First one came from Chanel Ali saying, with Salah, if you're praying Salah and you're new to Islam and you're learning the words and you know the words in Arabic, do you need to know what the words mean in your mother tongue? So when you recite, So if you're reciting, let's say Allahu Akbar, and then you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Do you need to, while you're reciting it, should you know what you're actually saying?
Who's to answer that? Should I answer that?
And
is it free? Yeah.
It's free. It's free.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. So my answer would be yes. That one should understand what it is that they're actually saying. In fact, people that I know that have become Muslim before reciting in Arabic, they would actually perform the prayers in their mother tongue. Now, in order to actually deliver the prayer, it is best and it is important and fard, so mandatory, that you do actually recite it in the original Arabic, because there is a language barrier between Arabic and English or Turkish, and there is things that get lost in translation. And even the word Alhamdulillah, as we just mentioned, there's not one word that can represent that word in the English language. The English language is quite weak compared to Arabic.
Oops.
But it's important to actually understand what you're saying. And so I know a lot of people that would at least perform it slowly. You don't have to know everything overnight. It's the whole point about being thrown into the ocean, right? It's step by step, sip by sip. You don't want to choke, you don't want to drown. You need to quench your thirst slowly and learn it in English. Understand what it is that you're saying. You're meant to be praying with your heart. You're not just uttering words. You're not just doing physical gymnastics. When you pray, you're praying from your heart, and you're meant to be sincere. You're meant to have the right intention. So for me, understanding what you're saying and meaning it and being sincere is far more important than just regurgitating things that you don't understand. And hopefully you will get to a point where you are actually able to perform it in the correct original way as it was performed before as well.
That's an interesting point. And also, let's just always remind people that the majority of Turkish Cypriots and the majority, 99.9% of Turkish Cypriot, our ancestors and our grandparents, they followed the Hanafi school of thought. And under the Hanafi school of thought, it also I will just correct, Yusuf was correct by saying you can pray in your mother tongue until you learn the words in Arabic. So you can pray, so you can say the words. I want to give an example very quickly that has happened in the last few days. So in the last few days, we've had a lot of people come to Shakwale Mosque to do funeral prayers for deceased. And a lot of the youngsters, not a lot of people coming because of the COVID-19 restrictions. So 5 or 6 people, family members, many of them being only the young members, and some of them no Turkish at all. So I tried something new this week, and it worked. So when we're doing the janazah, the namaz, is reciting it aloud. It's fine, because although the Hanafi method, you have to recite it quietly, but there's not a problem with reciting the prayers aloud so people can hear. And I've also tried something new, was doing a translation. So after reading Surah Fatiha in Arabic, then say the words straight away in English, as the best of my knowledge, again with Subhanaka, again with the Salawat, and again with the Janazah Dua. And I had a lot of people come up to me and they said, that was really, really beautiful. For the first time, I've come to a mosque and actually understood what I'm doing. And the guy said, 2 of the guys said, can we come every day and listen to you? And can we participate in the prayers? So it's really important that you do, brothers and sisters. I remember as a young guy came from Turkey, was studying at Cezire. I had to take him to the Home Office. And I remember I learned a lot from this young guy, much younger than me. But every time he was reciting a prayer, he would say to me, I actually learned what each word means. So when I say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, I know that I'm praising God, the Lord of the heavens and the universe. And this is really important. If we can just spend some time, just learn maybe a line a day, or line a week, just not to kill your time. But yeah, another question, maybe Ertan, Amber Ispanadi said, what's the whole story about this pork business? Why can't we eat pork? What's in the Quran? What's the story? What's the real story?
That question's for me, yeah?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, the flesh of the pig, pork, in other words, is something that is prohibited in the Quran. And I think maybe about 2 shows ago, was it the last show? I can't remember. I had to confront a similar situation, similar problem, and my answer is basic and simple. If you are a Muslim, Muslim means somebody who submits. Islam means submission. If you listen to the words Islam and Muslim very carefully, you'll pick up on 3 letters that are repeated. SLM, salam, also meaning peace. The word that we use in Turkish, teslim, also comes from Arabic. It means to submit, to surrender, right? So our religion as Muslims is to submit to the way of submission to God, right? So if we are Muslim, and if we believe in the Quran, if we believe in Allah, we believe the Quran is the word of Allah. When we see something in the Quran that says something is prohibited, whether we understand it or not, whether we understand the science of it or not at the time, we have an obligation as Muslims to accept the ruling and to follow suit. It's not enough to just say, I believe in it. You have to practice it as well. You have to follow up your belief with words. So it is in the Quran. The Quran prohibits eating pork. And I could give so many scientific explanations. I'm not a doctor or a scientist or anything like that, just based on other things I've read, things I've picked up on hearsay. I could give so many. I could be sitting here talking about it all day. But I don't have time for that. So really, all I can say is that if you are a Muslim, if you consider yourself a Muslim, and if you find a ruling in the Quran that says you should not do a certain thing, by all means, go out and try to learn the scientific reason. But until you do, just follow it anyway. So yeah, it's in the Quran and full stop. That's my answer, really.
Thanks, Ertan. Ertan, can I add something to that? And maybe one of the guys can correct me. Or is pork also forbidden? Because people ask this question. Because Islam is a continuation of the monotheistic faiths. So it's a continuation of the Abrahamic tradition and the Abrahamic faith. The belief in one God comes from our father Abraham, which is also the patriarch of Judaism and Christianity. In the Bible, it says you should not eat pork. So is it not just the continuation of the Abrahamic tradition?
I mean, we see nowadays Jews, they don't eat pork. If they are practicing Jews, they don't eat pork. In fact, they eat only kosher meat, which is the Jewish equivalent to halal. Christians, on the whole, probably the majority of Christians today, whether they go to the church or not, they eat pork. But that's actually something that they shouldn't do. Because as you rightly said, we are following a long line of prophets that came with the same message. And this message stretches all the way back to the first man, Adam. And the message is pretty much the same. Moses came with the Torah. Jesus came to confirm the Torah. And then Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, he came to confirm that which was with Jesus and Moses, and so on and so forth. So we're all following the same path here. And just because our Christian friends decide not to follow that aspect of their faith, they are in many ways following a culture which is devoid of the faith. Just because they're doing that doesn't mean that we have to do the same.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go on, please, Ahmed.
So, going back to like how Islam is that continuation of the original, the monotheistic religions like Christianity and Judaism, it's actually, I would also say it's like the re-establishment of the original religion of God. So the original religion came to all the prophets since the time of Adam. But over time they changed. But then prophets came to certain different nations to re-establish the original religion. And then the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he came, he finalized the religion and re-established it to the original religion for us to follow.
Can I also just add one thing to it as well? Because
we've got about 5 minutes, guys. Yeah.
Cool. So it's just one small point about when you read the Bible in the New Testament, it's very clear that Jesus himself never ate pork and did obey the laws. But what happened was, politically speaking, after the time of Jesus, you had 2 strains of Christianity, and it was the Pauline Christianity that won. And Paul taught in the New Testament. Paul, who never met Jesus, never walked with him, never talked with him, never spent time with him, but saw a vision. He stated that, you know, one can do away with the law, and all you have to do is believe that Jesus died for your sins. And that's why many modern day Christians today who follow this Pauline way of school, this Pauline school of thought, now eat pork. However, if you look at Jehovah's Witnesses and others that actually, or that were even observing the Jerusalem church in the early centuries, they never ate pork and they upheld these traditions. And the last point is, one doesn't have to eat meat to be a Muslim. You could be vegetarian, you could be vegan. In fact, there's no hadith, there's no statement, there's no record of Muhammad ever eating beef. That's right. Not to say that he didn't, but there is not one single narration to say that he did. And there were companions at the time that didn't eat meat, and meat is actually discouraged. And Omar ibn al-Khattab, one of the well-known companions, stated that one should try to reduce it, like the consumption of alcohol, and to the extent that you should only have it probably like once a month. So you will find certain Muslims that actually are more akin towards vegetarianism or veganism as well.
Can I just add,
is acceptable? Yeah.
The lady that did ask this question did actually reply back and said, I don't eat it anyway. It's disgusting meat. Just wondered why. Lots of different theories. That's all. So that you just cleared it. Thank you, Ertan. And I actually believe it does come back from the Abrahamic tradition, because the circumcision and the forbidden to forbid yourselves from eating the swine comes from Abraham, and the Prophet Muhammad, of course, was a descendant of Abraham, and he revived, as our brother Ahmed Barut said, it was a revival really of the monotheistic faith, bringing it back to life. One other thing I want to say to Yusuf, very good point about Christianity, but we need to remember something, brothers and sisters. Let's not judge Christianity because what we see in the UK. For someone like Ertan and me and Mustafa and the other brothers who maybe have traveled the Middle East, we have lots of Christians in the Middle East, and they will not touch pork. So the Coptics of Egypt, they don't really eat pork. They get circumcised. If you go to Ethiopia, you cannot tell the difference between a Muslim and a Christian Ethiopian in the village. They dress the same. The worship is practically the same. They even go down into prostration when they're inside their churches. So we should not judge the whole of Christianity who are following this kind of Pauline theory, because most of the Christians in the Middle East, like in Iraq and Syria, they don't eat pork. They circumcise their children, and they use a lot of Arabic words as well, like mashallah, inshallah, Allah. So if you ever come across someone and they're wearing a cross and they're using words like Allah, mashallah, inshallah, they could actually be like a Christian Arab or someone from the Middle East. And we've got lots of similarities. One last question, brothers, because I've got to be on another show. And April's question was, maybe we can leave this to next week. Drinking alcohol is forbidden, it says in the Quran, but even like one glass of wine?
Yeah, that was
that one.
So with alcohol in Islam, it is not allowed actually for Muslims to drink alcohol. And if I'm correct, I think in the Quran, someone can correct me maybe, Allah says that there are benefits in alcohol. However, the negative part of it outweighs the good part of it, and it is actually not allowed in Islam. That's my. Anything else? Anybody want to add as well?
I think the Prophet also said, alayhi salatu wasalam, and I only know the Turkish hadith, so I'll try to translate it. A large amount will, if you consume, will make you drunk, and a small part of it is still haram. Çoğu adama sarhoş eder, azı da haramdır. But brothers and sisters, you know, there's lots of things that are haram. I mean, the best thing we can do is try to refrain from these acts and just try to perfect ourselves as best as we can. It's been a great show and lots and lots of positive messages. I'm sorry that we have to end the show because I need to go on another show in the next 3 minutes. So those who are following the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Today is going to be the most important part. You can watch it on the UK Turkish Cypriot community page in the next few minutes. And we are at the stage of the Prophet receiving revelation from the Archangel Gabriel. So please stay tuned. My deepest thanks to all the viewers. My deepest thanks first to Mustafa Qureshi from Cezire Dernegi. Always great to see you here. Yusuf Ahmet, amazing, very intelligent. You're giving us your knowledge, sharing your knowledge. Ertan Karpazlı, always a pleasure to see you here. And our two teachers, Ali Mullah and Ahmet Baru, thanks for arranging this and making this. And people are really enjoying these talk shows, as you can see. Let's keep it up, and we'll be back next week with a different topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.